Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Unveiled Widow podcast. I am so glad that you decided to continue on this journey with me and join me today. But before we get started, as a reminder, hit that subscribe button. I want you to become a member of the Unveiled Widow family. Company went through a layoff. Now, mind you, during this time, because Nathaniel had already lost his job, he was now on my medical coverage. The whole family was all on my medical coverage because I was the only one working. So here comes February, and I get laid off from my job. My company was in this whole trying to rebuild process, trying to create new things. And during that process, they spent a lot more money or didn't realize that they were going to spend a lot more money in trying to renovate and grow and expand. And in turn, had to do several layoffs within the company. So I end up being in one of those groups of layoffs. I think by the time they finished layoffs, they probably had let go of close to about 350 people. Um, and that was the hardest. I mean, next to hearing my husband had cancer, losing my job while I was now the provider and of not just financially, but also of his medical care. That was probably the hardest conversation um, that I had to endure at the time because immediately my concern didn't go to finances or whatever because I knew I'd be able to do unemployment or whatever. But where my concern went to was him being able to stay on his course of treatments. Because as you know, when you lose your job, in my case, my insurance ended the very last day of the month that I was let go, which was in February. Um, which means then you went on Cobra. Well, Cobra, one, is not cheap. And two, a lot of times you may not, if you have a pre-existing condition, sometimes that doesn't always carry over with new coverage. So that was a huge concern of mine that he was not going to be able to get his treatments. But no, thanks be to God, he did. It was covered in our Cobra. So here we are in February. I am now off of work. And he has taken another dive in his cancer health. By this time in February, he was probably down to approximately about 180 to 178 pounds. So as you can see, he was pretty much dropping sometimes between 10 to 15 pounds every month is what was beginning to occur. And, my children were all there. We're trying to feed him. At this time, as you know, my older daughter was in college, so she was kind of away during this process. But my younger daughter and my son, we were all at home together, and we're, trying to make sure daddy's eating. And when mommy's at work, my daughter, when she gets off of school and they're off of school, everybody's trying to make sure that that um, my my spouse is getting what he needs. And so uh, February happens. I'm now home. So now I have more access to a lot of things because I'm home. Um, and as I mentioned before, we had been battling with some things in our marriage. Uh, those things that we were battling came to greater light for me once I came home. I came across some information to find out how great the challenges really were in my marriage. And on top of battling uh, with my husband's illness, I was now battling with the hurt of betrayal. Um, but I couldn't allow my focus to stay there because my focus had to be on trying to help him through this process. And even through the course of conversation, once, all of this came to light, my conversation was I've never been one um, to kick somebody when they're down. I've never been one to just leave you hanging despite what you could have done to me. And I loved him. He was my husband. We were now going on being married almost 20 years. That particular year because by this time this was March of 2018, February of 2018. That year we would have been coming up on our 20th wedding anniversary in the month of August, and it was very hard. And I had to have that hard conversation um, to say, like, hey, this is where we're at. I'm going to be here to support you through this. I'm going to be here prayerfully to get you through this, just like we did the first time, or to be here with you for whatever that end result is going to be. And that's what I did. I not in myself, and that's why I say, um, from a faith standpoint, it was nothing but God. It was nothing but God that kept me and kept my family. Um, that it was God humbling me in the midst of my hurt, in the midst of my pain, in the midst of not understanding why me, um, in the midst of being concerned about my children because they're watching their dad have to go through this process. And in the midst of me still loving this person despite everything that's gone on because they're my partner. Watching, watching him, and he was a man's man. Watching him have to humble himself as a man, um, to have to be now taken care of, to to the point where I am having to give him a shower, having to clean him up, having to carry him and walk with him up and down stairs. We had a two-story home. Um, Carrying him to the bedroom, picking him up off the floor when he fell down, because these are all things that occur as you're going through the harder stages of cancer, that a lot of times they lose their balance, they begin to lose function. And because of him losing his weight, um, he was losing strength. So from February, from February going into March, going into April, um, he was deteriorating before our eyes. He was deteriorating. But he was not going to let anything stop him from being able to support our kids. And one thing I will say, despite any challenges that we may have had as a couple, Nathaniel was an amazing father. He was an amazing provider. He was an amazing friend to those that knew him. He was an amazing employee. His work ethic was ridiculous. Um, but we just had challenges as a couple. Um, but that didn't take away from who he was as a dad. And he, despite how weak he was, by this time I was pushing him around on a walker because his strength was gone. We would go to soccer games and we'd push him in the walker to the soccer game, to my son's football games, to my son's basketball games. Um, in June, again, this year we had so much go on. Several years before, he had lost his mother. Um, and then coming into 2018, he was not only battling with his illness, but the health of his father began to start over the last couple years had start to take place. And in 2018, his father's health got worse. And um, at this point, this was about May, end of May, um, going into June. And I was in the shower. I was in the shower with my husband because I would have to bathe him, and I would be in the shower with him to bathe him and to clean him up. And by this time, he was probably down to about 165 pounds. And I was in the shower with him, bathing him, and he immediately collapsed. And I dropped to the ground, holding him, slid down to the ground with him, and I began to watch his bodily functions dwindle, meaning my husband was losing his life at that time. And I began to just start praying the blood of Jesus, the blood of Jesus. Again, I am a faith based family. We believe and trust in God, even through everything we were going through. But I began pleading the blood of Jesus, the blood of Jesus. And my son had came in, and I told him, call 911. Um, like I said, at this time, my son is 10 years old. I tell him, call 911. I need you to call 911. And I'm laying on the floor with my husband in the shower, with the shower still running. We're all getting soaking wet, and I'm just pleading the blood of Jesus. And I begin to watch my husband's life come back to him. And the ambulance comes. We take him to emergency. And this is where my husband's journey really begins, going towards um, the end of his life. We took him to emergency, and from this point on, pretty much from this month of June um, up until he passed away, the rest of his time was pretty much spent between hospitals, emergencies. He would maybe come home for a couple, maybe like a week or two, and then something would happen and he would end up back in the hospital. So when we went to the hospital, the paramedics came, took him to the hospital. We found out that he had had a pulmonary embolism. Um, so here we are. He had, once again, he's weak. He's about 165 pounds. He's now had a pulmonary embolism that pretty much almost just took him out of here. But God restored time. God gave him a little more time. And we end up going through rehab. We took him to a rehabilitation center so he can try and rebuild his strength. Hopefully try and get him to really start eating, because he still really was not eating, which is why he was losing so much weight. And then the next news drops. His father passes away. His father died at the age of, he was in his 90s. I believe he was like 93. And this was the first week when his father's funeral was happening, was the first week. We had just put my husband into the rehabilitation center to try and regain his strength, so that, he could become a little more mobile, or just even more so, just rebuild the strength in his legs, because with him losing all this weight, his muscles were deteriorating. Everything was deteriorating. So here we are, and his father passes away. We had just put him in the rehabilitation center. And once again, this is where the blessing of my sister comes into play. Because my sister was an oncology nurse, they originally were not going to allow my husband to leave to go to his father's funeral. But because I could tell them that my sister was an oncology nurse, this is what she does, they released him to be able to go to the funeral for one day, just for that one day. So, because my sister was going to be able to be there with me. And so we go to the funeral. And, when you talk about time, not everybody gets to have time. But God blessed and graced my husband to be able to have time. Not only time to see people, but time to spend with us, time to be able to say goodbye. And when we went to his father's funeral, he was at this point, my husband had no strength. He was in a wheelchair, and we were pushing him around in a wheelchair. Um, and this was really the opportunity that everybody really got to say goodbye to my husband, um, at his own father's funeral. They knew something was wrong with him. Not everybody knew what was going on with him, but clearly, seeing him now at like 160 pounds, and he's never been that small ever, since probably like high school. Everybody knew something was going on, but they didn't know what. So everybody, all different family members were coming around and speaking to him and saying hello, and it's good to see you, and we're praying for you, and all of that, not knowing that just 2 months later, we were going to be saying goodbye to him. So, part two of this journey, time. Time. That was part two of this journey of cancer journey. God gave my husband time. Um, Again, this process was not easy. It was not easy for me. It was not easy for my children, because just as I'm watching him deteriorate, my children are watching him deteriorate. And they're there with him, um, while he was at home, trying to help him through everything, trying to support mommy to help daddy. And it was not an easy process, not by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, this walk of widowhood is not easy. But the walk before widowhood, especially if you're dealing with a spouse who's dealing with a terminal illness, is just as difficult. But the one thing that it did allow us was time. It allowed us time to prepare, even though you're never really prepared, to say goodbye. It gave us time to grieve, in advance, which I'll talk about that a little bit later on in other podcasts. But it gave us time. So, 2 months later, after having to say goodbye to his father, 2 months later, in August of 2018, we had to say goodbye to Nathaniel. And it changed our lives forever. But once again, what I will leave this podcast today saying is, no matter how great the challenge, no matter how heavy the hurt, no matter how hard it may seem, like I said, I was battling his illness. I was battling now realizing that I was going to lose him. And I was battling the death of my marriage all at the same time, while trying to maintain being a mom, being a wife, being an employee, being a daughter, all of that. I will leave this podcast today, at every time I hop on here, reminding you that you can make it. The task may seem great. It may seem unbearable, unfathomable, but you can make it. You can get through it if you don't give up. Hold on. If you are a faith-based family like we are, pray. Trust God through the process. Trust God to keep you through the process. Trust God to carry you through the process. And even while you're going through it, it's okay to cry. It's okay to break down. Because trust me, I had all those moments. And I would have them alone and away from my kids. That I would go into my closet and just break down and cry. And you're going to have those moments. And it's okay to have them. You need to have them because they're a form of release. And you need to be able to release. But do not give up. And more importantly, remember, you are not alone. You are not alone. There are people around you that love you. There are people like me who have walked this journey and are here to support you that you can make it. Do not feel alone. Don't allow loneliness to make you believe that you're alone. You can feel loneliness without being alone. And that's one of the things that I had to learn. I was not alone, even though I was dealing with the feeling of loneliness. I was not alone. I had a complete support system around me. But more importantly, I had God with me. He was with me and he was with my family. And he's still here with me and my family, helping me to hold on and to carry on. So today, no matter what you are going through, no matter how great, you're not alone and you can make it. Just hold on. Hold your head up. Stay encouraged. And know that there is a brighter day ahead. That no, the loss will never go away, but the sting and level of that pain will die, even though the loss does not go. But that feel and that sting of grief and the loss, it will die down. You will get through it. You will get over it. Just hold on. Once again, thank you for coming to the Unveiled Widow podcast. I'm Tanisha, your host and creator. I hope that you have enjoyed this podcast today. Please make sure that you subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Be sure to like, share, and feel free to leave a comment, and I promise I will respond to you. Thank you, and until next time, I'll be looking forward